One of my pleasures in life is giving talks with obscure titles that nobody understands, which is why we came up with this. I just want to clarify things for those of you who are not fluent English speakers. I'm talking about the country Wales, not the animal. The animal has an H in it. So, first of all, before we start, a thank you to the sponsors, a thank you to the organizers, a thank you to the team. You know, Mihai and Tudi do a fantastic job with their team bringing all this together every year and organizing it. And I was thinking, now it's the 8th time this conference is held, and maybe it's high time we upgrade 2D and start referring to him as 3D. This is my 10th talk at IT Camp. I don't know if I have the record, but 10 talks, considering I missed the 2 first years, is going to be quite a lot. 10th talk, and for those of you who've been here before and have heard me before, you know that I've only got 2 subjects that I ever talk about. So tomorrow's session is called Quality is All in the Mind, which therefore means tomorrow, 11 o'clock in the purple room, wherever that is, I'm going to be talking about quality. So obviously today I'm talking about change management, improvement, and so on, which fits in as a nice follow-up to what Jason was saying. Let's go through some of the basic practices of improvement programs, all right? Number 1, which is often the most difficult one, is we recognize that what we expect is not what is happening. That's already a challenge to recognize and admit it. Number 2, we publish new policies and procedures and standards. Number 3, we collect measurements of things. We tell people about the policies, procedures, and standards and metrics, and we tell them all about this. We audit things. And we realize that it's still not happening, and we need to go back to step 1. Start all over again. This doesn't work. This is the traditional improvement program. So a few years ago, they came up with another system, which was called nudge. And nudge, I've presented it here before, is create an environment that encourages behavior. Make it easy for people to follow the crowd, okay? Encourage a tribe mentality. Point out that 90% of the people are doing it correctly, rather than attracting attention to the 10% who are not doing it. Drop hints as to what should be done, and basically everyone is, okay, start again, didn't work. The idea of nudge is that we are trying to create something that was demonstrated years ago by making dogs salivate when they rang a bell. You've probably heard of this experiment, this terrible thing. This is the dog that he used to ring a bell to make it salivate. When you see the box and the way the dog was fastened, you realize that all this dog had in life was salivate at bells. Okay? So why does change fail so often? Personal, I think that change and improvement programs fail approximately 80% of the time. And Why do they fail so often? There's a very simple reason. There's a bug in the system. Like everywhere else, there is a bug you haven't looked at. It's small, it's unobtrusive, I don't know where it is, I don't know how to fix it, but something is making things happen. You've probably heard, and the same kind of idea, of the butterfly effect. The idea of the butterfly effect is a butterfly flaps its wings in South America and a hurricane happens in Africa, or something along those lines. Small event creates a series of consequences which make things happen. One of the things I like about butterflies, it's not quite the butterfly effect, but it's still a great story. It's a man named Chuan Cho. The story goes that he dreamt he was a butterfly every night. Every night he dreamt he was a butterfly, until he came to the point where he did not know if he was a man dreaming he was a butterfly, or if he was a butterfly dreaming he was a man. An interesting concept, because this is very close to something I have learned to appreciate immensely, and that is the principles of quantum mechanics. Let me give you another example. Anybody know who this man is? Nobody. There's one hand that flapped up over there. Tarek Bouazizi was a street salesman in Tunisia who one day the police came over and took his cart away and threw all his vegetables away because he was missing a piece of paper. His family depended on him. He had no money. There was no way out of this. The police was corrupt, and he did something extraordinary. He publicly set himself on fire as a protest against police corruption. I have to be careful. I'm using the word corruption, which is always a dangerous thing to say in Romania. Every time I come back to Romania, I have to ask myself, what is the latest bizarre political scandal you've managed to invent? It's very extraordinary. You are more inventive in political scandals than anyone else. Anyway, he set fire to himself. His self-immolation was the starting point of a series of revolts and revolutions throughout the Arab world, what was called the Arab Springtime. The Arab Springtime spread across the countries, led to the Egyptian Revolution, led to the current state of Syria, led to massive immigration from Syria and other countries of people coming to Europe because they were being bombed out of everything, which led to a strong uprising of nationalist and populist feelings. Think about that. The situation today in Hungary, Brexit, and many others, Trump, all this comes back to a policeman stealing the market cart of Mr. Bouazizi. That's the bug in the system. Let me give you another example. In 1416, if I remember correctly, the West Indies Trading Corporation was created. The idea of the West Indies Trading Corporation was to start bringing back from India essential things that the English thought they needed. This included silk, spices, opium, all the basic necessities of life. One of the things they brought back was tea. Now, tea led to a habit of boiling water. Interestingly, by the way, tea was made popular in England through the coffee houses. One generally thinks that the English found tea before coffee. It was actually the other way around. But they started boiling water, which is that when the Great Plagues went through Europe, because the English were boiling their water, they didn't suffer as much, and therefore they started the Industrial Revolution. Boiling water had effects. It made things move, it made steam, it made the lid of the kettle bubble and things like that. And so there is Thomas Newcomen, I wrote down his name, translated this into a way of pumping water out of tin mines. Because mines get flooded, in their deep holes, it rains a lot, and so they get flooded, and he developed a way of pumping water out of these mines in order to clear them. That concept very quickly led to a new idea that if you can use it to pump water out of mines, maybe we can use it to move people and create an engine. And so the British railway system started occurring and people started traveling from one area of the country to the other. Now this created a problem because every town in England was using a different time. All right? It was 12 o'clock when the sun was above. So it was 5-10 minutes different left and right. So because of this and because of trains traveling, we had to unify the time, and someone decided to unify the time based on the Greenwich Observatory. And said, Greenwich Observatory will decide when it is 12 o'clock, and that's for everybody. This is GMT. Greenwich Mean Time was created for this purpose, which allows today GPS satellites to fly. GPS works because the English imported opium and tea from the Far East. History is full of these stories. History is sometimes called chaos squared, because not only do you have these little events that create things that we didn't imagine, but there's the other way around, is that when you try to influence history, it usually works the wrong way around. Okay? If the economy is slowing down, and so the banks say, well, next month we're going to reduce rates to borrow money because the economy is slowing down, immediately people start buying things, which pushes the economy up, and the bank has to do the opposite. I live in a country which is plagued by a terrible disease called Brexit. And one of the key reasons Brexit happened was before the referendum, opinion polls showed it had no chance of getting through. But the vast majority of people were opposed to it and it wouldn't happen. What was the result of that is that the people who opposed it thought, well, we've won in any case, I can stay home. And the others thought, we have to put in a last-ditch effort, and everybody went out to vote. And they won by a 3.5% majority. This impact of things against others and little twists got me interested in the principles of quantum mechanics, particularly when we're talking about improvement and change, because I found a lot of parallels between quantum principles and change management. Okay, I'll give you a few here. All energy is transmitted in wave packets or quanta. All energy is transmitted in consultants' fees. Unobserved quanta phenomena are radically different from observed ones. Theoretical 5-step improvement programs and models are radically different from real life. At sufficient high levels of attention, energy particles emerge from waves. At sufficient high levels of attention and investment, improvements might emerge from activities. The way we observe the quantum field decides what we see. Thus, your belief systems determines the reality you experience. The way we observe changes decides what we see. Thus, your management's observation of the results determines your bonus. There's a lot of, in fact, the first thing that got me interested in the parallels between change management and quantum mechanics was when I discovered that an elementary particle is not, as we usually show it, as little planets turning around one another, but it is actually a positive core surrounded by a cloud of negativity. If you have tried to do improvement, you're very motivated, you're eager to make it happen, to get results, and you find around you this cloud of negativity where everyone's saying it'll never work, they won't accept it, that's not possible, and so on. Quantum physics does work, surprisingly. The more you look at it, the more you realize this is an absurd theory, that Douglas Adams in his Hitchhiker Guide had no idea how stupid reality was compared to what he was inventing. It works because it is based on the concept of energy. Energy is everything, and with enough energy, change and improvement does happen. I've thrown a picture of Albert Einstein and a quote of his because it always raises the IQ of the audience. Everyone likes to see a picture of Albert Einstein because he's got a bad haircut, and we sort of think, I can do that. Otherwise, this has nothing to do with anything else. If you want to change, you have to invest a lot. And it's not just money, it's a large amount of energy to make it happen. And that is where things go wrong, because I want easy solutions. Just fix it, make it work. So I'm giving you here a first principle, which is based on Kepner Tregoe. Who knows Kepner Tregoe? Good. Basic principle of giving a talk is know just a little bit more than your audience. If somebody knew about Kepner Tregoe, I'd start worrying. The idea of Kepner Tregoe is to create a structured approach to decision making which focuses and helps you determine what is the right decision and how to make it. So it's largely covered in this little diagram here. There's center bit here of situation appraisal. We've got a problem analysis, we've got a decision analysis, and we've got a potential problem analysis phase. We start with the situation appraisal. You see, there's a little blue triangle there to remember where we are on the chart, which is trying to identify why things went wrong. Things have been going wrong since day one, okay? I can deal with that. Or things have started going wrong at a moment, and I need to decide what happened, okay? If you are always delivering your product late, there's a significant problem that needs to be analyzed. If you have got a catastrophic defect or security breach or whatever it is, that's the other approach. What happened? Why did this happen? Because telling people not to click on links in emails, that's a lovely idea, and you know it's not going to work. It's not going to work because those of you who were here last year saw how Jason Street managed to send an internal email from one employee of a company to another employee of the company who they were friendly with without knowing anything about them, just by searching online while in a boarding room waiting to board a flight. So when you receive an email from a colleague with a link, you assume it's safe. One of the things we don't do enough when we have a problem is actually state what the problem is. Come back down and say what it is that we're trying to save, to correct. What is the problem? What are the potential causes? Evaluate them, measure them, confirm the true cause, think beyond the fix. How are we going to make this happen in a continuous, how am I going to make the correction remain afterwards? Okay, so try to think broadly as to what we're trying to do. We then come to the decision analysis, define the decision, what it is that we're actually trying to decide. Not the choice that has been made, but define the decision that needs to be made, clarify purpose, lists the musts and wants in the possible solutions, accept weighted score, so every want has a weight on it, every must has to be satisfied, analyze, make the decision, and identify what's going to go wrong once you have made this decision. Plan contingencies, make sure you understand it. This is a step-by-step process which is good, which works, and yet which fails. Why does it fail? Well, because I have to decide what are the weights I'm going to put on the wants. I have to decide how I'm going to measure things, and how I measure things will determine the results I'm getting. And most importantly, you don't have time to do all this. Just solve it. So I like this approach. I have used it. It works, but it takes time, and management will say that's not what they want. They just want a solution. Stop analyzing the problem. So, I come back to the exciting bit. This, for me, is something which is, it's been out for a few years. Not enough people know about it. Who knows about Cynefin? Anybody? Nobody knows about Cynefin. Cynefin is a Welsh word which talks about where you belong. It was developed by Dave Snowden, who is one of the most intelligent men I have ever met, in Wales. Okay? We've had quantum, we've had the butterfly, here come the whales. The idea of Cynefin is to identify where you are before you start doing things. So it's pushing the identify problem one step earlier. It appears as a typical two-way table, but that's not it. Cynefin is a sense-making model, not a categorization model. Every consultant you have ever met has a nice categorization model and fits your problem into one of the boxes and then says that's how to do it. Okay? The only thing that changes are the axes. It's always 2 by 2 because all the world falls into binary solutions. Except you don't know if that is correct. So what they have done is taken the principles of complexity and translated this. So we have got ordered things and we have got complex things. Complex was split in two. There's complex and chaotic. What we're going to do is try to identify what differentiates an ordered organization or situation from a complex one, and what differentiates a complex one from a chaotic one. In order to make it more interesting, there's added the disordered bit, and ordered has been split in two between complicated and simple, or later changed to complicated and obvious. This is the basic concept of Cynefin. We're going to try to place you into one of these. The reasons most companies are in trouble, the reason that things are going wrong, the reason that you are having security problems, that you are delivering bad quality software, that you're not delivering on time, is because you are usually at least in a complex environment, if not a chaotic environment. And yet, you are applying obvious solutions to complicated or chaotic problems, and they don't work. The formal Cynefin chart graphic looks like this. It's a little bit more lively, but it's basically the same order. So we have got obvious, complicated, complex, and chaotic. Starting with the obvious. Obvious, there is a clear path between cause and effect. I know what is happening. I can understand this. I have got strong constraints. I know that when I do this, that is going to happen. It's very rare in the real world for things to be obvious. It's predictable, it's repeatable, it's all these things that the improvement models and quality models promise you but never seem to really reach. If you have a problem here, sense it, have a look at it, understand it, put it into the right bucket, and apply the right solution. Very simple approach. These are what are usually known as best practices. I've done it 1,000 times. If that's what the problem is, this is the solution. We know that, cause and effect, immediate, it's done. We then come to the complicated one. This is the area of consultants. Okay? Cause and effect are not evident. You need to actually come in and do some analysis in order to understand. There are constraints, but the constraints tend to influence the outcome. They don't determine it. So you've got your cause, and it can create a number of possibilities depending on. We then come to the complex. This is actually where most companies are. Complex means that there are very few constraints, and that really the cause and effect are only ever identified afterwards. Okay, it's a little bit silly of me to say that one policeman overturning a handcart created 500,000 deaths and a policy of protectionism and populism across Europe. That's hindsight. That's complex situation. What happens in a complex situation is I'm going to try things. I'm going to probe. I don't have an obvious solution, so I'm going to try a number of things. I'm going to try, I'm going to try, I'm going to try again, until I find something that looks as if it's working in the right direction. And once I've got something that was working in the right direction, now I can respond. This is where I'm creating new situations. So in the obvious one, we had best practices. In the complicated one, we have good practices. In the complex one, we have emergent practices. So things we're starting to discover this seems to work. And then we get to the horrible one. There's no more cause and effect. No more cause and effect. Everything is going wrong. Obviously, this does not reflect on anybody here or any one of your companies. But imagine a fictional company in which we have delivered bad quality products and clients are complaining, and so we're spending a lot of time in fixing defects, and we're spending most of our time in firefighting, which means we don't actually have enough time to finish off the new products correctly, and so we are releasing products that are not quite finished, and so we have got bad quality products going out the door, and so we have customers complaining, and so we are firefighting, and okay? How do you stop this? How do you stop this? Whoever you speak to in the company will tell you our number one problem is lack of resources. Anybody here ever seen a company where people think there are not enough resources? A few. The others are happy with the amount of resources. The answer I've always been giving is it's not that you don't have enough resources. The problem is you have too much work. Okay? One of the big challenges in any software company is to tell the salespeople, stop, we're full. Can't do anymore. When you're in the chaotic, you need to start by acting, do something. Solve the immediate problem, and then start identifying how you can simplify this, how you can get back out of this situation. So you're first going to act, then you're going to start sensing as to what is the right approach and how to react to it. Now there's 4 different categories: work. The problem is finding out where you are. And where you are is where your preference goes. So if I am talking to bureaucratic or process-focused people, they will very quickly go towards the obvious. If I am talking to consultants, they will very quickly go to the complicated. I was talking just now about the dog that started drooling when it heard a bell. you have about the same approach with a consultant that sees a problem that fits his normal solution. They start drooling because they have the one solution to whatever problem it is. You choose your preference and you start believing that this is the way to do it. And that is where you are stuck in this middle bit here, which is the disorder. The disorder is when you don't know where you are. I believe most companies who are having problems don't know where they are and are not taking the time to identify what it is that is really the issue and how to start solving things. What you want to do is you want to focus. No, I'm a slide. Yes. The obvious bit, there's a little tail underneath here. The little tail is the slip bit. The obvious area is where you're always using the same solution for the problem because you think you know it, because you've always been doing the same thing. And very quickly from obvious you fall into chaotic because the solution doesn't work. Not because it worked in the past that it's going to work this time. Getting out of chaos is a lot more difficult. Where you want to focus your attention is in the complex and complicated area. These are the areas that work. They work nicely together, and you want to try to move between those two. So what we try to do is to move items from complex into complicated. So it's simplifying them so that we have got standard solutions. And from time to time, we're going to release the constraints, move something from complicated into complex in order to try something new. Complex is great for discovery. You can find new solutions to problems in the complex area. In the complicated area, it is great for exploitation. This is where we have got something that is running. What you sometimes might want to go through chaotic, just to sort of throw a spanner in the works, create a problem, and see how it works out. And then you've got some things that fall from complicated into obvious. The best thing I can say about falling from complicated into obvious is that obvious is where the cash cows go to die. Okay? It's an old problem, it's an old solution, it keeps on working for a while, it'll pay your bills, and then something better will come along. So the obvious is an area you probably want to avoid in general. So, general picture. We have got complex. Let's start obvious. Sense where you are, what you're trying to do. Categorize it, put it in the right bucket. Use the correct response, which you've already done previously. Complicated. Try out a few things. Analyze it, bring in the experts, bring in the consultants who have done this before, who will have a look and create the response. Complex. It's difficult to identify the solution, so I'm going to try several things. And I'm going to try different solutions in parallel. And I'm going to try potential solutions that contradict one another, just to see what works best. I'm going to sense what works best and then create a response. Chaotic, I first act, get us out of the immediate trouble, then start sensing and responding what is the solution. In the obvious, I have got fixed constraints. I know how things influence one another. Complicated, I have got governing constraints which influence things, but it's not always obvious. Complex, I have got enabling constraints, so they can be used to help you to move forwards. And in chaotic, I have got no constraints, so I cannot identify what is the cause and effect in a real way. We've got different levels of practices. The chaotic one is where you're creating new things, the thing that nobody has thought of before. That's the exciting one. Complex is the emergent, so we're creating something, we've identified the problem, and we are doing something that is working a little bit better. The big thing now is moving from one to the other. So I've talked about the little tail underneath here, which is the slippery point that makes you fall from obvious into chaotic. That is the big danger. Other changes, you have to consider what you're doing in order to try to move things back towards complicated, where they are manageable. You want to test things that are safe to fail. You want to try and get things that can be observed. Within the Cynefin process, we want you to start working with where you are. You've got silos, you've got issues, you've got communication. Take them on board, work with them. In most change management systems, we work on what we want to do and then give up because it's too complicated. Consider the human metadata. Consider sociology. How do people react? Coming back to Jason's talk, he talked about a number of times where it's the people who are creating the problem. How do you use the people to create the solution? And then we have got this purple line that comes on top of everything else, which is the liminal area. So you can move from one area to another. There's a bit of space between complicated and complex. It's not a clear stop. There's a bit of space between chaotic and complex. It's fairly small. There's no overlap at all between obvious and chaotic. Once you fall from one into the other, you're in trouble. Obvious in software development, great if you're working with waterfall development, works fine in the obvious environment. Scrum is somewhere between, or time boxing is somewhere between obvious and complicated. Scrum is more into the complicated area. Beyond that, who knows? By the way, one of the recommendations of Cynefin, which I thoroughly enjoyed, was related to pair programming. Anybody here do pair programming? Okay. One of the statements they made is pair programming. It is easier to teach a client to think like a software developer so that you can work with a client and a developer together on pair programming than it is to teach a software developer to think like a client. And I think Mr. Snowden is correct. Finally, yep, a few comments on measurements, because we all like measurements. Work from where you are, start fixing things. The moment you use a measurement as a KPI, as something you need to focus towards and your bonus depends on it, your measurement becomes valueless. Okay? you start focusing on how can I give a good number rather than how can I satisfy my clients. So I'm very much for measurement, but measurement is there to identify where we are and not tell you where you should be. System thinking usually starts from an ideal situation and doesn't work. Complexity thinking starts from where you are, understanding how complex it is, and taking an approach to help satisfy things. Discover along the way what works, what doesn't work. Try things out. Value the cynics. Cynics are wonderful people who will tell you why your thoughts are rubbish. Describe where you are, understand the current situation before you decide what to do to reach nirvana. Okay? These are some books that I strongly recommend. This is my reading matter from the past year. I've thrown in mine as well. I haven't read it, but these are some very good books which cover various areas of what I have been talking about. I am told I am out of time. I am told that my microphone is the only thing stopping you from having coffee. I will be around. I'm happy to talk with you. I'm happy to discuss things with you. I'm not an expert on Cynefin. I have been reading a lot about it. I think it is extremely valuable. Unfortunately, I have not found a good book on Cynefin. There's this one, which is the mini book, which is something. Most of the good data on Cynefin is online. So if you can remember how to pronounce it and how to write it, which are two completely different things because it's Welsh, and the Welsh don't actually use letters like the rest of the world. Look it up. It's really worth it. And for me, it is one of the two great breakthroughs in change management over the past few years. The other great breakthrough in change management over the past few years, if I'm invited back next year, I'll tell you about then. Thank you.